In this video, I'll provide an overview of our part 2 of the research project. So here we are on our home page, and I'm going to go ahead and click on the research project here. You can also get to this through the research module in our modules page. But here we've got our different tabs. You've already done part 1, the project proposal, and I provided feedback to everybody already. So I'm going to go ahead and click on part 2, which is our descriptive statistics, and this assignment's worth 10 points. And so in your previous part 1, you identified a city and a business idea, some potential variables of interest that you might want to analyze from the Airbnb data set, as well as some outside secondary sources that'll help supplement some of your research. So in this part of the project, you are now going to analyze your data using descriptive statistics, which you learned about in chapter 2 and 3. So here we're going to create some charts and graphs as well as some numeric measures. Now, developing descriptive statistics can actually help you narrow down specific neighborhoods or types of listings that you want to analyze or target if you haven't already done so. And so hopefully you've already watched the video on how to clean and filter your data using filters as well as pivot tables. And so you also want to make sure that you've reviewed the data dictionary if you haven't already, but I believe you should have if you had identified different variables of interest. But it's a nice refresher to click on this if you need to check it out again. So in your part 2, you're going to write a 1 to 2 page single spaced. So in business, we don't do double spaced, we use single spaced, and we use a business memo. So please look at the business memo template and follow that so you get good practice. Now in your memo, you should have the following items. Item 1, this is based off of your discussion board 6, where in your group you discussed where the data set came from and some potential issues with the data. So in our memo, you need to explain the data collection or the methodology of the data set and what specific issues you anticipate might affect your data analysis and results. And note that there's always issues with our data. So I strongly recommend, if you haven't already, is to review the Airbnb data set page, which had our list of locations. There's a brief description on where the data came from, but you can also dive deeper by clicking into the Inside Airbnb link, and it gives you more information on where the information from, how it was collected, what's it used for, and who's using it. It's important to know where the data came from. 1, someone might ask you, and 2, it might also explain some of the issues behind the data. So the original data was collected by the company Airbnb when it was trying to connect hosts with travelers, and then a third-party company called Inside Airbnb downloaded their data and put it in files for consumer usage, and then I downloaded the file and cleaned it, and then I gave it to you, the student, to organize and clean for your own purposes. So this is an example of secondary research that you're doing because the original source was Airbnb. You need to be able to explain that process because there might be some issues. For instance, because there were so many people involved in touching the data, there might be some errors. Now, in our item 2, you want to include your actual descriptive statistics from chapters 2 and 3 that you talked about in your discussion board 7 and explain what you intend to show a decision maker. So it's helpful to think, okay, you're starting a business and perhaps you need an investor or a bank loan. And so what you're presenting in this memo should be persuasive and well explained in order to convince the decision maker to support your business. So for instance, you might calculate the average price per night for some neighborhoods in your data set and create a chart to compare the neighborhood costs per night. Such information, for my example, would help my bike and wine tour business in Montreal, so I could see how to price my tours that are similar to the budget of travelers who are willing to pay a certain amount for their Airbnb. Now, item 3 is you want to make sure to explain the potential business implications based on your descriptive statistics. So perhaps my secondary research on Yelp showed that there's no bike and wine tour businesses in a couple of neighborhoods, and our data from the Airbnb analysis show that my prices are moderate, and so my tour prices should also be affordable or moderate as well. Or perhaps I want to look at my data and purposely find a more high-priced neighborhood and charge higher prices for my tours. So if you click here, you'll see some examples of the Descriptive Statistics Part 2 from two students. I've got one for Barcelona and one for Portland. So if I click on this, you'll be able to download these examples. So I'll open it up real quick. And so you can see here the student explains where the data came from, points out some of the issues that might go with the data and the way the data analysis might turn out. They've got some descriptive statistics in the form of charts here. And then further down, they've got some descriptive statistics in terms of numeric measures according to Chapter 3. Then they explain why this information is useful and some of the implications for their business. If we look at the other example, here's another one. Again, they explain where the data came from, some issues about accuracy. Their descriptive statistics is a pie chart, so they're showing the percentages out of the whole data set in that neighborhood that they're working with. And then they describe why this is useful. Now, I recommend doing at least 2 or 3 charts or numeric measures. That way you have enough content for your presentation. Or if you have an error in one, at least you've got one good graphic or chart elsewhere. So it's just helpful if you do more analysis that way. And I'll provide feedback on it and make suggestions. Perhaps you need a different kind of chart, or you should provide more information, or you can explain something a different way. Now with your charts, you can't assume just by looking at it someone will understand. So that's why in the written text, it explains or describes what we're looking at. Now, next, I'm actually going to show you how to run some descriptive statistics with your Airbnb data set. So here is my Airbnb data set for Montreal. I've already cleaned and filtered it, so I'm now focusing on the neighborhood of Ville Marie. If I double check here, I can see I only have Ville Marie. All my other data I've deleted out, and so I only have data for this neighborhood. Now I've highlighted some of the variables that I can now analyze. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to do a pie chart on the property types in this neighborhood. So recall you learned how to do a pivot table. And so I'm actually just going to click anywhere and it's going to do a pivot table for the entire data set, for instance. So I'll go ahead and go to Insert and click on Pivot Table. And it's just going to select all my data. And I'll go ahead and click OK. And so I've got my pivot table on a new tab here. And I already know I've only got one neighborhood, but to double check, when I click on neighborhood, I can see I only have Ville Marie. So that means I've cleaned everything out and deleted all the other neighborhoods I did not care about. And then what I'll do is I'll take my property type and go ahead and drop that into rows. So it breaks out the different property types in this neighborhood. And I want to take that property type and drag and drop it over into values because I want the pivot table to count it for me. So based on this, I need to copy and paste the relevant information. So it's my apartment, condo, house, and townhouse and the count. So I'll right click and copy, and I'm just going to put it over here to the right. Because trying to create graphs in pivot tables is not very pretty, especially if you mess around with a pivot table. So I like to copy and paste it separately. So what I want to do now is I'm going to select my data and go to Insert, and I want to choose a pie chart. I'm using a pie chart because I'm displaying the whole of our neighborhood, Ville Marie. And so I want to know the percentages of it. I'm actually going to make this bigger, make it more visible. And so you can see here, I don't have the data points. So I want to add data labels by clicking on Add Data Labels. So hopefully this feels familiar. We did this back in Chapter 2. And the numbers that appear are the ones from the table. That's not as helpful. I also want to include percentages. So if I right click on any of the labels, it's going to select all my labels. And then I want to format data labels. Anytime we're formatting, we're changing the way something appears. And so I'll click on that and I want to add the percentage. Okay. And so now I've got the count of each type and the percentage, which might be cumbersome to see. So perhaps I'm going to uncheck values so that all I see left is in percent. And I can change the position if I want it in the middle or inside end, outside end, or best fit. Like it'll play around with this, but you can also physically move the labels in the space as well. Go ahead and close this. This is really small. So what I want to do is if I click on the labels again and I go to the home, I can format the font size just like I would with any document or chart. So I can change this to maybe size 20, and I can make this like bigger and stretch it out, and I can move, you know, these percentages over for a little bit easier viewing. You can even format data series, and that'll let you rotate your pie chart. See, so I can kind of move it or angle it, and maybe it's easier if I leave it like this, and then I'll go ahead and, you know, play around with my formatting. I like the 93 inside. Maybe I'll take these smaller percentages out a bit for better spacing because it doesn't fit very well inside the pie. And then I want to make sure to name my chart. So this is property type in, or property types in Villa Murray. You can also change the font size for the legend. Same thing, but just by clicking on it and then going to the Home tab and Font, you can just make this bigger until it's something easier to see. So you want to play around with your charts so that they're visible with good font size. People can see it and read it and understand what it is that they're looking at. Let's go back to our Airbnb data. Now, what I also want to do, why don't we analyze price? And so what I'm actually going to use is the Data Analysis Tool Pack. If you haven't done this already, there's a link in every week's module in the chapter resources that has instructions on how to turn on the Data Analysis Tool Pack. So mine's turned on already, so I'm going to go to Data, and I'll go to Data Analysis, and we're going to use Descriptive Statistics, because that's what our assignment is, and I'll click OK. So for the input range, this is the data I want to analyze. So I'm going to click on column P, which is my price column. My first row here is a label, so I want to make sure to check labels in first row, because otherwise Excel will get annoyed when trying to calculate what price means. And then I'm going to click on Summary Statistics and click OK, and it's going to create my Descriptive Statistics chart. And since we're working with price, I can actually change this into dollars. So if I highlight my mean, standard error, median, mode, standard deviation, and go to the home, there's number formatting right here, and I can turn this into dollars. It's a little bit easier to work with. My minimum and my maximum, that might be helpful to know. And my sum and my count. So now I've got some descriptive statistics, so I can put this table into my Part 2 business memo and use it to describe what the price looks like in Villa Marie. So if we look at our Airbnb data, pretty much anywhere that has words, you can do a pivot table to count how many times it appears. So for instance, if I scroll to the right, the cancellation policy is a categorical or nominal data point, and I can use a pivot table and count that and do a pie chart, for instance, for any of our variables that are related to money. That's ratio data, meaning there's a true zero. So you can do descriptive statistics on these, for instance. And then you've got numeric values here for the number of guests that it can accommodate, the number of bathrooms, bedrooms, and beds, all values that you can run descriptive statistics on using the Data Analysis Tool Pack, anything that you think might be helpful to inform your business. One more descriptive statistic that some of you might be interested in, if you haven't cleaned your data or deleted it completely, and you've got all the neighborhood data still available. So for instance, here I've got Boston open, it's completely uncleaned. You'd already learned how to do pivot tables to organize some of this data, but I'm going to run through it again real quick. So if I go Insert, Pivot Table, and I'll go ahead and click OK. And then I take my neighborhood cleansed, I drop that down, so you can see I've got all these neighborhoods right here. Then I take the price and I drop that into values. And so sum of price isn't useful. Recall I need to double click on sum of price and a little menu opens and get the average price. Right, so I've got my average price, and I'll go ahead and turn these into dollars. Now what I can do is if I, and I want to sort this, let's say from high to low or low to high, or you can keep it in alphabetical order, your choice. But if I take this and I copy and paste it right next to it, what I can do is now create a bar chart that compares the average price. So I'll go ahead and select this, go insert, and in my charts here, look for the bar chart option. And now I have a bar chart with the average price per night. So I'm going to add data labels. That's not the prettiest. I got to make it bigger, I think is the best way to do that one. And so now I've got my prices here and I can see the average price per night by neighborhood. Now, if this looks too difficult to see, what I can also recommend is, well, maybe we only do a chart on the top, I don't know, 10 locations. So I can actually tweak this if I drag the blue and purple lines up and say I only want to go up the first 10 or first half. So if I only select the first half, now my bar chart is easier to see because it only focuses on the first dozen or so locations. So you have to make these decisions of like, how much information do you want to show? Do you want to show the prices for every single neighborhood, or do you just want to show the prices for your top neighborhoods? Is it like the top 10, the top 15, or maybe it's cutoff point, anything over $190, right? So you get to make all these decisions that you think is useful for a decision maker to see. So again, I'll name this, right? Average price per night for top Boston neighborhoods. So this is combining what we learned in a previous video with pivot tables to calculate some descriptive statistics. And then when you copy paste it, you're going to take what you learned from chapter 2 to make a chart. So if you have any questions, just let me know.